Put a new face on an old kitchen. The Home Depot's cabinet experts can reface your kitchen cabinets for a mini makeover in a fraction of the time. And right now, you can get an extra 10% off. Our licensed local experts can get the job done right away. So don't face another year in an outdated kitchen. Try refacing it. Get huge savings now, only at the Home Depot. More saving, more doing. Offer valid through January 17th, 2018. License numbers available at homedepot.com/license numbers.
Welcome to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast, your source for solutions-focused dialogue about race in America, with your host, Scott Speed.
Race Haven Podcast. This is solutions-focused dialogue about race relations in America. My name is Dr. Scott Speed, and I am the facilitator of the dialogue. This is episode 24 of Race Haven, and today I am joined by my co-host and friend, John Costino, who's the founder and president of MoneyWise. How are you today, John?
I'm doing great, Scott. It's a pleasure to be back here with you.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you on as well. As the listeners may be able to tell, my voice is a little compromised today. I lost my voice over the weekend, but we are soldiering through. I'm excited to be back on to bring the dialogue to our listeners. So we're going to just, move right on through. We're also joined today by two special guests, one of which is Miss LaNee Javet, who is the founder and CEO of Cosire.com, where culture and desire meet. I love that tagline and that content. And she's also the founder and CEO of the Mogul Institute. How are you today, LaNee?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. How are you?
I am doing well. So happy to have you on here. I can't wait to get your perspective on today's topic. And we're also joined by another special guest who is a regular contributor and guest to the show, Mr. Montoya Smith, who is the host of the Mental Dialogue Live Experience in Atlanta and also the host of the Mental Dialogue Podcast. Montoya, how are you today?
You're doing well. Glad to be back with you, everybody. We all friends here. Glad to be here.
All friends here, absolutely. So as I do, I like to tell everyone, how, the connection, that and how we all kind of know each other before we get into the topic. So as Montoya alluded to, all friends here, I'll say that as our listeners, they've heard John before and they've heard Montoya before, but LaNee is new to the show, and I'm excited to have her. And LaNee, how she is connected to us is LaNee is a part of the mastermind group here in Atlanta that Montoya and I and LaNee, we're a three-person mastermind group of entrepreneurs. We call ourselves the Social Innovators Mastermind, and, we come together and we help each other to think through some of our business goals, challenges, aspirations. We provide each other with insight and, inspiration, and it's always encouraging. We meet once a month, so I definitely recommend to anyone out there that's an entrepreneur or just anyone really to, it's always good to have a mastermind, a group of people who are like-minded, going in the same direction that you can get together with and motivate, inspire, and encourage and provide each other with resources. So that's how LaNee is connected with us, and I'm excited to have her on today for today's topic. Today's topic, we're going to dialogue about the election of Donald Trump and if that will have a negative impact on African Americans. And the genesis of this topic is obviously the election that just took place last month, about a month ago now, where Donald Trump was elected to be the next president of the United States. For a lot of people, it was a surprise. And we did our last show on the topic of, Donald Trump and if a vote for Trump was a vote for racism. If you haven't heard that show, I recommend going back and listening to episode 23. But I want to expand on that because I've had a lot of friends and colleagues and through the social media sphere, which is where I get a lot of my news, most of my news from. I've seen a lot of fear, and I've seen a lot of frustration, and more importantly, I want to stick on fear. I've seen a lot of fear from my African American friends and colleagues with the election of Donald Trump. So I want to discuss that, want to unpack it, get the perspective of our guests on, where that's coming from, if they feel it's valid, and what, if anything, we can do about it. But before we jump into the dialogue, as always, before we do that, let me see here. I'm getting a little feedback. If you guys, for the guests who are on the line, I don't know if there's any wind or anything in the background, but if you could be mindful of that while we're recording, that would be great. But before we jump into the dialogue, as always, I like to talk about the difference between dialogue and debate. And as you all know, it's something I like to start each show with because I think it's so important. And I believe that dialogue is greater than debate. In debate, there can only be one winner. In dialogue, participants work together towards collective solutions, towards win-wins. And each week I like to share a different example of how dialogue is greater than debate. So this week I want to share with you that dialogue respects all other participants and seeks not to alienate or offend. In contrast, debate rebuts contrary positions and may belittle or deprecates other participants. Now, that one right there is a really hot button, one for me in terms of the contrast between and the difference between dialogue and debate, because I'm sure all of you are in tune to and aware of our climate, our social climate, our political climate, where we have a debate-based society. And, we have a one side wins and the other side loses society. And I totally reject that. Everything that I do and everything I speak towards is about dialogue in terms of how we communicate, as well as in terms of how we engage politically, socially, and economically. I believe in creating win-wins. I believe in collective solutions. So one of the things that is pretty common in our society is that, when I see people get into their arguments and their debates, I won't say instantly, but a lot of times it goes towards belittling. It goes towards name-calling. It goes towards all the things that we tend to teach our children are not, ethically or morally or socially sound, especially myself as an educator. But then as adults, these people who are supposed to be the leaders of our nation, the leaders of our country, every 4 years, especially around the national, election time, we see this. We see adults calling each other names if they don't agree with each other. We see our politicians calling each other names if they don't agree with each other. And for me, it's like the biggest hypocrisy, in the world. And I just don't understand how we continue to allow that and we continue to model that for the next generation. And I just feel like at some point we have to step up, and we have to take the step up on the social evolution ladder and be above all of that. And even when we're in disagreement with one another, we can learn how to communicate in an effective way where we don't alienate one another, we don't intentionally offend one another towards common solutions. And that's what dialogue is all about, and that's what we attempt to model on this show. So here's our framework for authentic dialogue on this podcast. Participants listen with a sense of curiosity and ask questions to uncover the underlying assumptions and beliefs behind someone's statements. Participants are willing to communicate their thoughts openly and honestly while putting aside emotions, defensiveness, and a desire to be right. Participants approach someone who sees a problem differently, not as an adversary, but as a colleague in common pursuit of better solutions. Now, that framework is very important because you're going to hear us disagree on today's podcast. And I asked my guests to put on their dialogue hats, and I'm putting on my dialogue hat, and we're going to engage, and we're going to ask questions, and we're going to dig deeper and try to get to the underlying beliefs and feelings to understand why we feel the way we feel. And ultimately, we're just going to share our perspectives and hope that, the listeners can gain something from it. So with that being said, come to the dialogue. My guests, John, LaNee, and Montoya, are you ready?
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
All right.
I am ready.
Awesome. Okay. So, as I tend to do, I like to pull comments from social media to kind of set the tone for the climate that's been, going on out there, and then I have a couple links that I may, add as well. But I want to go back to the overarching theme of the top of the show, which is the election of Donald Trump going to have a negative impact on African Americans? And the reason why I want to focus on African Americans, because let me be clear, and I want to make this clear, that I understand that there's a segment of Americans that think the election of Donald Trump is going to be hurtful for all Americans, no matter their ethnicity. But the reason why I want to focus on African Americans is because this is a show about race relations. And again, as I take the pulse of my timeline and my friends on Facebook, a lot of my African American friends have some serious concerns around race and around safety. And one thing that I want to highlight, actually off of a post that Montoya posted the other day, was recently there was in the news, there was footage of Jim Brown, who is a civil rights icon in terms of the work that he's done since the 60s for civil rights for African Americans. And more recently also Ray Lewis, who is a retired NFL football player, who's very, had a very, very prominent. I'm sure everyone knows that name who knows sports and knows football. And they recently had a visit with Donald Trump, at the Trump Tower to discuss economic development in the African American community. And instantly on Facebook, I saw a lot of pushback, a lot of African Americans who felt like they were tokens. I saw that term being thrown out there, that they were tokens. I saw other terms being thrown out there that they were actually traitors, traitors to African Americans and to their race. And ultimately, before I go into one of the comments specifically, I want to ask my guests, have you guys seen, I know Montoya, you posted this, so I know you have thoughts on this. So as a matter of fact, let's just go ahead right there. Let's start with you, Montoya. Do you have any thoughts on what you saw, and more importantly, tell me what you thought, tell us what you thought about those two going to visit Donald Trump and how it relates in terms of race relations for African Americans and the Trump presidency, and also what you thought about the backlash that was pretty prominent on social media from a lot of African Americans.
Well, yeah, let me actually start with the backlash. I was actually pretty saddened by it, and literally off the strength of Jim Brown's track record, as you just mentioned, being one that's very prestigious as far as, in a sense, standing up as a man at any opportunity. And we can countless acts, whether it was standing behind Muhammad Ali, if you go back into his college history, you find out, being on the African American on the lacrosse team and what he went through on the football field and things of that nature, walking away at his own terms and continuing to be a part of the community. So he just has this avid track record that, as you've kind of mentioned, getting into almost what I consider a bipolar society, whether it's all one way or the other, that one moment such as, meeting with Donald Trump, regardless of how people may feel about Donald Trump, pretty much for some people seem to wipe away that entire legacy. Not completely surprised by it, but I addressed it because it's not right and it's hurtful for those who proclaim to care about our community, which he has already proven that. And so in proving that, in choosing to have a door to the president, whether it's token or not, because, there's something to be said, unfortunately, for our community that quite often that entertainers and athletes are, in a sense, trumpeted out front. But that's almost a whole other conversation. But in the case of Jim Brown, who has the track record, Ray Lewis, is intentionally trying to become a voice, and people may feel one way or other about him. But particularly to Jim Brown, you have a scenario where with his track record, well, in my opinion, even in that meeting, we don't know the exact words, but in that meeting, I would say there's somebody, regardless of what Trump may say or think, he's still in that room for us. And so for it to be looked at as any other way is ridiculous. I don't want to dominate and go back and answer your first question. I'll let some other guests jump in, but I definitely wanted to address like it was just disheartening to see people quickly erase away an entire legacy simply by meeting with a man. But I'm not completely surprised, as I just said, just because we are now what I consider almost a bipolar, schizophrenic society when it comes to agreement and disagreement.
Okay, thank you for sharing that perspective. And to add a little more context before I ask LaNee and John to jump in, the comment that I'm speaking to in terms of there's a person let me just start from the top pretty much. Montoya, on his Facebook page, he just wrote a comment basically questioning all of the pushback towards Jim Brown, basically saying that, Jim Brown has done so much in terms of activism in his lifetime that most of us today wouldn't even be able to carry his jockstrap, literally, Montoya said, and obviously making that, that reference to, sports and everything with the jockstrap. But one of the comments on that post said this. It said, publicly criticizing Cap's protest and declaring he fell in love with Trump is very problematic. Trump using Jim Brown's hard-earned reputation to trick people into thinking he's harmless is very problematic. I respect what he's done in the past and over his life, but the current situation is a problem. So before I share with you the question that I asked that individual who posted that, LaNee, do you have any thoughts on this particular topic?
I actually do, and I think it's a good question. I actually saw a post that was very similar in nature, and so I want to first say that I understand both sides of the equation, both sides of the argument, but I think that how I feel about it is this. I think that taking the opportunity to meet with prominent leaders in the Black community would be great, and I think that the downside to that and the unfortunate piece is we don't have any prominent leaders for Trump to meet with, so there's that. And since there aren't really any prominent leaders to meet with, he has to rely on celebrities and people that, social activists of days past. I'm not taking anything away from Jim Brown, but he's not necessarily an activist of today. I think that there are other people that Donald Trump could have met with that more properly align with today's agenda for Black people. I don't necessarily think that meeting with celebrities and people that are going to give him, press time, that are going to look good in the newspapers and look good from a, reality TV show perspective. I think that there are other people that should have been in those meetings. I think that having the meetings is great. I just don't understand or feel that our agenda is necessarily going to be moved forward with the people that he has selected to meet with. So not taking anything away from Jim Brown and all that he's done, I just feel like where this community needs to go today, the people who can lead us there today, I don't think that those people were there. And since I mentioned that we don't necessarily have any prominent leaders, so that I know somebody's probably thinking, well, then who would he ask? He would have to get down and talk to some of the socialists, not socialists, but some of the social activists of today, whether that, and I won't say any particular names because everybody's definition of a social activist and a social leader is going to be different. I'll just say that I think that the proper people that should be in those conversations were not in those conversations. In my opinion.
You're saying that, so you want to see people who are on the ground, people who've been in the communities actually working on the ground level for years, for decades, who that's their day-to-day work, instead of those notable faces. I get that, and I will have to say I agree with that, wholeheartedly. So, John, how does this land with you so far? I don't know if you're familiar with this story. If you have any comments on this particular story, do you have anything you want to add to the whole Jim Brown, Ray Lewis, Donald Trump meeting portion of the show?
Sure, and obviously, Scott, you know me as well as anyone. My frustration is not a white-black thing or an African-American or European-American thing. My frustration is a brainwashing of basically our entire population. And what I mean by that is people are going to see what they see. This is a classic example of is the glass half empty or half full, instead of recognizing it's the glass, let's empty it out and let's fill it the way we should fill it. And the reason I say it that way is Trump was already judged before anything began. He had already been pegged and judged because of the media during the election. After winning the election, he was then judged again before doing anything on all of his selections. We are living in a society right now where both African American and European Americans are just brainwashed 100% by whatever the media wants to say. And I will point blank give examples if we need to give examples, but my statement is there was nothing Donald Trump was going to be able to do that was going to make people happy, because we still have idiots running around protesting the election on merits that make no sense. And my whole point is, until we as a society come together and say we want things to get better for everyone, we as a society, as a human race, as Americans, want it to get better for everyone, it's never going to be good enough. Now, I'm not even a big fan of Ray Lewis. I have my own personal issue with Ray Lewis from stuff that went on in the past. But my point is, there was no one Donald Trump was going to be able to sit down with and people were going to be satisfied. And that's because he's already been painted, judged, and everybody's made their decision on him prior to winning the election. Now, my point in closing on this is, if there is a list of people that would be considered worthy and legitimate for him to meet with, then I suggest someone put that together and get it out there. Because all I have seen in the last 6 months is any African Americans that suddenly supported Trump were sellouts. And that is the most ridiculous thing in the world, because prior to his election, prior to running for the presidency, he's been in the public eye for 30 years. And we talked about this on a previous show. For 30-plus years. And he took all kinds of events and photo ops and interviews with prominent African Americans, from Al Sharpton to Don King to athletes to entertainers. And everyone loved him. He's never, ever been accused of being a racist or anything negative until he chose to run for the presidency against the liberal Democratic media and the machine that it ran. So I'm going to say it one more time. We can put together whatever list we want. We can do whatever we want. But we together, not just the four of us on this call, but we as a society have to make the decision that once and for all, we want a change for the better and a change for everyone.
Okay, so before I
say something to that?
Montoya and LaNee jump in, LaNee, let me. Okay, you know what? Yes, let's just go with that. I was going to jump before I let you jump in. I was going to, throw something out there, but you know what? Let's just let it happen organically. You got something you want to say? Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I don't even know if it's an add or a piggyback, but he said something that made me think. He said that up until recently, Trump hadn't been challenged, and so I want to agree and disagree. I agree that he hadn't. As a reality superstar, as a real estate mogul, as a business person, he hadn't been challenged. He hadn't been challenged by Americans or the entertainment industry. It wasn't until he started running for presidency that he started talking about let's make America great again and riling up all this negative energy. So I kind of agree with what John said. He was never pressed prior to becoming president, but when he when he became the presidential candidate, he started heavily relying on this negative energy that brought this very ugly reality of racism to the surface. So it's kind of a catch-22 when you say he didn't get any of this backlash until he started running for presidency. Well, he didn't start telling us how he felt until he started running for presidency.
Well, I guess my question then is, there were plenty of people that the last 30 years, I'm saying go back to the early 80s. He was very well known. I'm not just talking about his TV show. He was very well known, very well respected, and very well loved in the entire community. And my question is, why are Don King, Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, just go through the list. Why are they all loving on him if he's such a terrible, horrible racist? Because we know that there are terrible, horrible racists out there, and I don't remember seeing Don King and Muhammad Ali, and people that we all agree have a good enough eye and ear to know what a racist looks and sounds like. Why are they now saying he's this horrible person, yet for decades, not for months or for years, but for decades, he was loved and revered across the board, and there was nothing about it. That's a really important thing for me.
Let me jump in.
Yeah, I can answer that question very easily,
quick.
actually.
Montoya, hold on, Montoya.
Please go ahead.
Let me just throw something in before I bring you back in. I recently, just to kind of add to that, I agree with, I have some stuff, but I know, Montoya, you'll probably cover the disagree side. I just want to throw the agree side, and the thing that I question as well throughout the process. I listened to a lot of podcasts, and I recently heard some with Russell Simmons, for example. Russell Simmons, I'll just say this too. I'm from Philadelphia, so Atlantic City is only an hour away, and Trump was very big in Atlantic City, hour and a half away. And between like growing up in northeastern PA, growing up in PA in the Northeast, people I knew from New York, African American people from New York, African American people from Philly, New Jersey, there was always this positive view of Donald Trump as I was growing up. There was never this negative, oh, he's a racist guy. It was always this pretty much a positive admiration, this hustler, businessman type of admiration for him, and especially within the hip-hop community. And Russell Simmons recently spoke about how he calls Donald Trump a friend. And Russell Simmons is a huge Hillary supporter. He raised money for Hillary Clinton, et cetera. But he was really surprised, too. It was interesting because he said prior to this election, he's known Donald Trump for decades. They partied together. He considered him a friend. But obviously in this election, he supports Hillary, and he didn't really know where the rhetoric that has galvanized all of the the prejudiced and racist people in America, whatever it is whatever it was in his platform that has galvanized them, that was a surprise to Russell Simmons. I was recently listening to another one. Scott,
you're leaving out something, Scott. Scott, you're leaving out something on Russell Simmons. It's very unfair.
Let me finish.
Very unfair to Scott. That's very unfair, but go ahead.
Just let me finish. You can say whatever you want to say. Just let me finish. And then I was listening to one with Stevie J, and Stevie J was speaking about how he used to be with Bad Boy, a producer, for those who don't know, with Sean Combs, Puffy P. Diddy, one of his main producers, and they used to party all the time together in the 90s. He said him and Donald Trump and another guy. Basically, there's a lot of these anecdotal stories about Donald Trump, having, social outings, et cetera, with the hip-hop African-American community throughout the 80s and 90s, et cetera. Now, if there was an agenda behind that and, to get them to come to his business, et cetera, I'm not saying that those things don't exist. I'm just wanted to add that to the dialogue, that perspective. So, Montoya, definitely want to let you jump back in. Go ahead.
Real quick on the Russell Simmons thing, actually what he was surprised about was the rhetoric from Trump. So I definitely want you to go back and check that. I mean, obviously, you have a perspective on it. I have another perspective on it.
That's what I said.
We can't.
Let me just
okay.
Let's
okay. So
clear.
the way you said it, you seemed to be. Okay, I misunderstood you. It sounded like you said he was surprised at the pushback against Trump. That's how I think I understood.
No.
That's what I thought I heard. Okay.
No, Russell Simmons said he was definitely surprised with Donald Trump's rhetoric. He was surprised with the rhetoric and the dangerous rhetoric.
Okay, I missed that. Okay, that's what I was worried about. I thought I heard it the other way. Okay, yeah, that was okay. Cool. So we're on the same page with that. Yeah. Maybe I just missed it, and I just definitely didn't want that out there. So I thought I heard it.
Okay, so here's what I want to.
But I wanted to answer John's question too. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead, and I want to let you jump in. If you want to
yeah. John's your question is very easy to answer, brother. Basically, there's a long history of anybody that is considered a celebrity of not seeing any type of treatment that maybe the masses are experiencing. So when Don King considered still considered, he definitely supported Trump. So, he's not somebody that changed his mind. We just heard about Russell Simmons, who he definitely said, I consider him a friend. Very shocked to hear the things that he's doing now because I hadn't experienced that. So your answer to, why didn't you hear the people you just mentioned, the names you said, Muhammad Ali, the Don King, these prominent names, it happens all the time. Celebrities may not experience what the masses may experience. His situations where he's being, sued because of how he maybe treated contractors, and obviously he's at the top, so that may be directly on the ground. So I'm not just trying to put that directly to him, but being sued for discrimination, and I'm friends with Trump. If I'm in that level, I may not know about that situation. So it's not as simple as why did they rub elbows with him, why did Mike Tyson love him, if they don't know that part, if he's not carrying out in that manner with him. I'm just giving you how that could happen. I'm not sitting here and just riding with the masses and says racist, racist, racist. I actually feel like, I think it's Van Jones, if I'm saying his name correct, from CNN, he basically said it the best. He said that he didn't feel that Trump was a racist, but he felt that he was a racist opportunist, a racial opportunist. Let me get the word correct. In which, in that situation, he definitely felt that's a bigger issue because all he does is play to the emotions. And so the last thing I'll say to you, John, is this. One thing that's I would consider a little incorrect about the way you're viewing this, you're absolutely right that the Democratic liberal media did what they did. You're absolutely right about that. But we cannot act as if Donald Trump didn't play a role with what I just said. What he definitely played to that rhetoric, and he put some of this on himself. So it's not just the media painting a picture. He definitely played a role in it too. That's more reality than just saying the media did it alone.
Well, Montoya, I will.
So let me ask you, John.
Let me just throw this one, and I'll kick it right back to you, Scott. I agree with you, but we're going to make this a blanket, universal statement. If you are a politician of any kind, you're a freaking opportunist, and that's their definition. So I'm not saying that Trump does not have political opportunist mindset, and in that tone, it may be racial, it may be gender, it may be all of potential. That's every politician. We could sit here and spend hours talking about Hillary, Bill, Bush, you name it. That's all of them. So I'm not going to say he's a racist because he's an opportunist, or else we can go ahead and debate every politician at every level for all eternity.
So you feel like the other politicians said things anywhere close or similar to what it is? Because I haven't heard those over the years, and I'm one to say that Hillary is racist. So I actually believe that Hillary is racist, but I've never heard her speak anywhere close to how this man spoke.
But that's because the media is controlling what we hear. That's my whole point.
I can listen to a whole speech that they don't cut it out. I can hear the man's whole speech.
I guess we're just saying two different things, because there's she's on record saying have two positions, one that you share publicly and one that you share privately. Do you remember that video quote of her?
We just did. I just said she's racist. So what we're not going to do.
No. I'm just saying that's a video.
I absolutely remember, because that's the biggest issue I have with her. That's why I never trusted her. But let's not change the discussion to trusting Hillary Clinton versus saying that he's comparable in his rhetoric to all politicians. You have to admit that Donald Trump has not been comparable to any other politician playing to racial insensitivities, gender insensitivities. I'm saying the word incorrectly. But you don't pretend like his rhetoric has been anywhere close to any politicians we've seen in the.
I will agree he is nowhere near polished enough to represent himself as a politician. And that was evident from his first day on debating and politicking. He is not polished. He spoke and put his foot in his mouth. He said some of the most stupid things you could ever say as a human, let alone a politician. But it doesn't change the fact that I would still argue that they all do it. Some of them are just way better. It's like Lance Armstrong and blood doping when he was racing. They all cheated. He just was a better cheater, and it took 2 decades to catch him. So I'm saying is that doesn't make Trump a racist. It makes him stupid, but it doesn't make him a racist.
So what happens is, for those of us that are African Americans, for the ladies, they don't hear it that way, John, because we're sensitive to never hearing other politicians sound anything like him. So you get to, I'm just letting you know, that's how we feel from the real experience of those words. No other politicians come close to it. Hillary hides hers, and I call her a racist, but she doesn't. It ain't just being polished. It's not fair to compare those words as if they're close to saying the same things, and he's just fumbling. He's very smart.
I'm not comparing the words at all.
Hold on, John.
John,
let me jump in, guys. I need you guys to, anytime, this is obviously going to be a heated dialogue, but I need you to let me facilitate a little bit, because there's certain things that are being said I want to be able to drill down on instead of getting to a back and forth, and also just giving each other a little space and time. I'm going to try to kind of facilitate a little bit more hands-on for this show to kind of guide it, because we definitely can go down a few rabbit holes, and I want to get to a few specific things. So I'm going to ask you guys for a little grace and allow me to jump in, even if you're mid-thought, because I want to be able to control the content, if you don't mind, just a little bit.
Absolutely.
So just really quick, Montoya, you said, and you may not right off top, I know I'm asking you out the blue, but do you have any specific examples of something that Donald Trump said that you can point out that you felt was very inflammatory? I know that's hard.
So the first thing that comes, first thing comes to my head is, look at my black. Look at my black. He's over there. He's not being loud. He's not. I'm obviously paraphrasing in the worst way, but he's basically his black. Like, how ridiculous is it to say, here's my token guy in the crowd that's not acting like these BLM people. Here, matter of fact, he's my black. Look at my black. There's no way you can tell me you can speak to me that way and care about me and respect me as an African American. Again, I didn't vote for either one of them, so for me, it's not. I couldn't. As far as Hillary or I couldn't vote for either one of them. Could not do it. But that day right there, and there's other things too, but that's the one that comes off my top of my head.
Okay, so yeah, he said. I just pulled it up real quick. He said, "Look at my African American over there." I would definitely. He said, look at my African American over there. So I would personally, I don't know. Again, it's hard for me to speak on it because I didn't see the whole full context of it. I could see how that. Let me say this. From my perspective, I could see how that's offensive. But I could also see how someone would say, like John would say, how that's just an example of how he's unpolished. Look at my African American over there. That could be someone's example of saying, well, he's just unpolished, and he was just trying to say, if he was better, he could articulate better. He might have said, look at my African American supporter or friend or whatever over there, et cetera. That's an example. LaNee, do you have any examples by any chance? Are you still there?
I'm still here, sorry. I have it on mute so that I don't have the background noise while I'm driving. Sorry.
Thank you.
So I'm going to be honest. This in particular election just made my stomach upset, and I tried to not feed into the cockamamie as much as possible. So almost everything that he said rubbed me the wrong way. But to give another example to what Montoya said, I know whenever he referenced black people, African Americans, he always called them the blacks. But when we're talking about the blacks, and I'm like, are we our own continent? Are we our own community? Are we separate from the United States? Are we separate from American people? Why are we the blacks?
Right.
I think there's a huge disconnection, and I think that I can see both John's point and Montoya's point. He's definitely unpolished. He does have, relationships with black people. He may not know how to speak to the masses, as Montoya said. But for me, it really comes down to, if you're not a racist, then say you're not. Stop fueling the fire. Stop pretending like you are them. Stop egging the people who are racist on as if that's where you stand. So if that's not where you stand, if you're saying that that's not what you believe, say that then. Don't let people vote for you and get behind you and support you because that's what they think you are.
Right. You know what? That reminds me of something that rubbed me the wrong way. And even though I know I've gone on record to say I don't vote. I don't believe in the system in general. I don't believe in, Hillary or anyone, and I think the whole system is flawed. But with that being said, I do pay attention. And one of the things that, definitely rubbed me the wrong way, for example, is when Donald Trump was asked to disavow his support from the KKK because they endorsed him. And I believe it was David Duke and Donald Trump, instead of saying, I don't know if disavow is the right term, but you guys know what I mean. Their support, he just said, I don't know who David Duke is. And I'm sure Donald Trump has heard of David Duke. He's one of the most, recognizable names in all of America because he was a state senator and he was the Grand Wizard of the KKK. Everyone knows who David Duke is. I believe he even ran for president at one point. And that may be true or false, but he's been a prominent politician and he's been out there. So instead of Trump just saying, I disavow that support, he initially just said, well, I don't. He jumped around the subject, and then
he was a politician.
The next day,
he acted like a politician on that.
Exactly. That's my point. Exactly. That's where I'm going. So that's where I'm going. Pretty much, the reason why he did that is because he knows that there is a large segment of Americans who are stone cold racists, who still are white supremacists in the worst way. He didn't want to turn them off because he knew that was a large portion of his base. And to me, that's disgusting. It is so disgusting. It is so, I can't even put into words how disgusting that is, that he could not just flat out, without thinking, disavow the support of the KKK. Like, it's unacceptable to me. It's
so disgusting. So disgusting that the rest of the politicians of the GOP absolutely did what every other politician would do right now. So in being a politician, John, he chose to go opposite of the whole GOP, who absolutely was saying, we disavow that. Ryan had to come out, since he would dance around and says, I don't know David Duke. Come to find out he did. But Ryan had to come out as the GOP speaker that says, we don't accept people that act this way or treatment. Ryan spoke up as a politician because at that time the GOP was scrambling because they couldn't believe he had done that. So when you say like a politician, again, I said to you, he doesn't do what other politicians do.
I welcome the chance to have my say on this. Please continue.
I'm done.
Okay, so I just want to give that as an example of something that Trump did to galvanize the support of the racist segment of Americans that was very, hurtful to African American people. And here's the thing, too. I want to make this point, and John, and I'll let you jump in. I think that, quite frankly, I know a large segment of white European Americans just don't care. That the trauma of the African American experience in this country, there are scars, and we are walking around as scabs, for lack of a better term, just to provide an analogy and a visual that can easily, like they say, you opened up that wound again. Unfortunately, because of our history, our collective history in this country, African Americans who are descendants of enslaved Africans, we are traumatized, and we can, you can do things that can bother us and can rip off that scab. And to see someone who's running for the highest office in this country not immediately disavow the KKK, I got to imagine that, a segment of European Americans, I know they get it, how that could be hurtful. And I'll say this, it is hurtful to me that there is such a large segment of European Americans who don't get that. So go ahead and jump in, John.
Well, I will put myself in the category that does get it, and I will simply say this. It was a boomerang effect. It doesn't make it acceptable, but it makes it understandable. And my point in saying that is, for every single person that can claim what you guys just claimed, that Trump absolutely was out of line and he should have disavowed any whatever with the KKK. I'll support that. But where was the same criticism when President Barack Obama was getting all kinds of support from very, very black activists that were clearly on an agenda? And we have to. You live by the sword.
I need to know who you're talking about. I'm just asking. I don't know. I have no clue who you're talking about to understand you.
Okay,
so I gotta give me an example. I'm trying to understand you.
I'll give you that. hold on, Montoya.
Okay,
I'll
I
give
didn't know
you
who you
Jeremiah
were
Wright. Do you remember that name, John?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, there was dozens of them, and it was in the news. It was very inflammatory, and I didn't hear a single African-American leader speak out and say, wait a minute, maybe this isn't right. Because President Barack Obama ran on a platform of we're going to unify this country. We're going to cross the line in the House and the Senate. We're going to bring the country. And then he ran, and the second he was involved as president, that whole agenda changed. And I'm not even – again, his comment shortly after winning – go ahead.
I want to thank you for letting me jump in, John, because I want to kind of control the flow of the show. So I want to allow Montoya or LaNee, I want to, get their feedback on. I think it would be a good context for our listeners. So let's just use Jeremiah Wright, for example, because I remember that, he preached from the pulpit, a lot of fire and brimstone towards European Americans and that was President Barack Obama's, pastor, and they showed that video. I do remember Barack Obama coming out and disavowing his relationship, and I felt like that was rough for me. I'll be honest, that was rough for me because I understand the complexity behind all of that, but I can also understand from a European American perspective who would say, well, that's a double standard or whatever. So I'll allow you guys before I kind of add on to what I think about the complexity, but I'll let you guys. I think it adds context. That's a valid question from John. So. LaNee and Montoya, do you have any reference? Do you remember that?
I do remember that. And I have a couple. I have more than. I want to say I need another example because if we only have one, I don't think one is enough. But the other thing is, Barack Obama also came out and said that he's the president for the people. He's not for black people only. He's for all people. He said that. Like, those are words that came out of his mouth. And then if you look at what he's done for America, you will look and see that he hasn't done anything for black people or African Americans, if we're going to say politically correct. So I kind of feel like, well, it's a good comeback. He didn't do anything. He said he wanted to change America. He did. There's a lot of agendas that have been brought to the table that have been moved forward, none of which have positively affected the African-American community. I love Barack Obama. I voted for him. I would vote for him again. So I'm not taking anything away from him or his legacy. But when you're talking about how Barack ran and the premises with which he ran on and the promises to the people compared to how Trump ran, there's no comparison. There was the riling up of racism that came while Barack was running was from the KKK. Yet and still, the racist community in America. He didn't play into it. He didn't rile it up. He didn't add fuel to it. He handled it like a gentleman when it was thrown in his face about having black supporters in the black community and his support of that community. He came back and said, I'm for all people. I'm for a united States of America. And John, you just said that. He said he was going to unite this community. That's what he said. Trump has not said that. He has not come up against the racist community, the KKK, and those that are supporting him and said, I'm for all people. If he would have did that, I probably could have been like, okay, cool. At least he's going to try to unify. But that's not what he said.
Okay, so basically what you're saying
I'll disagree with that.
Based on your perspective, when the I guess we'll call them they're called black nationalists. Basically, what John is speaking to is the whole black nationalist rhetoric that is very black nationalist, black supremacist type speaking that basically hates European Americans and speaks against European Americans generally, and is pretty much very firm in their stance that there's a segment of African American people who are pretty firm in their stance that they don't like European American people. They think that they're evil, et cetera, et cetera. And John is saying, that when those people came out to support Obama, that, President Obama, he had the same type of support from that side of extreme, Trump is getting. But what LaNee is saying is that Barack Obama was very proactive in terms of disavowing that support and also saying that's not, who he's trying to speak to. And she feels like Trump did the opposite. And, and Trump specifically tried to rile those people up. I just want to add to that really quick that, it's tough. This is so tough, man, because, perspective is so real. there's a video that was floating around that I sent to you a while ago, John, where, and I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch it, where at one of Donald Trump's rallies, he was making reference to, what they did to protesters back in the day. And it was an African-American protester that he was speaking to or in reference to at that time, or at least the way the video was cut, it looked that way. So I'll say that. But it looked like, he was basically speaking back to a time where the fire hoses and the dogs during the 60s when the African-American protesters, were protesting for civil rights, but they were getting their heads beat in. And Trump was saying things like, it was coded, but that demographic of, older European American people, that's the era they grew up in. And that's what they knew. They knew segregation. They knew, putting those people in their place. They knew all that stuff. And Trump was like speaking to it. He was encouraging the violence in his rallies. He never said it. He never, again, disavowed the violence. He encouraged it, and it was like he riled that up. He riled up that red meat. Like, let's go out and like tear it up, like, in terms of fighting against, any of their dissenters. So John, you could jump back in on that, and I want to just kind of bring it back to our theme, because I think that, what we're talking about speaks to some of the reasons why African American people feel so unsafe because of these messages and these themes. For those of us who grew up seeing the civil rights era, seeing the people that looked like us getting their heads beat in, and for some of us, they were our family members, and, getting their heads beat in or getting fire hosed or getting bitten by dogs because they were protesting. So when Trump speaks in that way about African-American protesters today, it just brings up some, again, it opens some wounds. So, John, what would you, I know you wanted to jump back in on that, so what do you have to say?
Well, I mean, there's a whole bunch of pieces that just got tossed into the puzzle, but the bottom line is. Well,
I'm sorry, John. I want to go ahead and be more specific, John, because I don't want to make this about Obama versus Trump, but I know that we use that to contrast. As long as we're going to acknowledge.
But wait, as long as we're going to acknowledge that this went on when Barack Obama became president, and then he was President Obama, he made a lot of cabinet choices. He made a lot of decisions that were very, very anti-white, anti-U.S. And all I'm saying is, does that now mean that we all are going to say he was racist and he was anti-American?
Okay, so now I got to ask.
I don't hear that. I don't hear that stuff. I can't even give it energy because I'm talking about his cabinet. And I mean, to be honest with you, Scott, I had to purge all this stuff out of my head a long time ago because it drove me nuts. But if we need to, we'll do another show on it, and I'll go do all the research on people that were brought into positions of power in the Barack Obama administration that were known communists, that were anti-American, that were, I mean, the bottom line is a lot of that stuff went on. I let it go because I understand I have no control over it, and I focus on the things I can control. But I never once heard him accused of being any of those things, even though it was right in front of us. And if we're all going to say we don't remember, then we'll just say we don't remember, and we'll do another podcast.
Well, the problem is you're to go now anti-communist, anti-American is not the conversation we're having now. I'm like LaNee.
Yeah.
What's the other example?
I don't want to go down that road.
Okay.
Yeah, I prefer not to go down that road, and I want to, like John said, we can maybe have that discussion again. I'll just say, and also just for me personally, I'm just so, anti-politics that I don't pay attention to most of that stuff, so I wouldn't be able to speak to it intelligently. So I want to bring it back to, the fear thing for African Americans in terms of, the Trump presidency, and I want to highlight a quote from the same individual that I spoke to before. So they go by the handle of HL Wynn. I want to just say that. HL Wynn is the handle that this individual, I believe is a female that she goes by. So I asked her when she talked about Jim Brown, I just asked, I said, so what is it exactly are you afraid of that, can happen during the Trump, presidency and, that's going to hurt African Americans? And I just said, how do you think Trump is planning to harm you? And how does using Jim Brown help him do that? That's what I wanted to know, because I wanted to drill deeper into her, her thoughts. So this is what she said. She said, number one, Trump has appointed known white supremacists to his administration. Number 2, Trump expressed his intention to reinstitute policies that have already been proven detrimental to us, such as stop and frisk. Number 3, she said it again, Trump has appointed known white supremacists to his administration. I find that interesting now in contrast to what John is saying, because he's saying, well, Barack Obama appointed known anti-American, anti-white people to his administration, which I never heard, and I didn't know that either. But I'm not saying it's not true, just because I didn't hear it. And then number 4, let's see. She said, okay, I won't go any further, but she basically was highlighting how, some of the policies, and stop and frisk is one that I spoke about, I believe, on our last show. That was another example that I gave that I was very disturbed by in terms of his support for stop and frisk. The statistics show that over 92% of the people who get stopped in the stop and frisk searches, primarily in urban inner city communities like New York City and the Bronx, et cetera, they are not carrying anything. They're able to go on with their way after their constitutional rights have been violated. Stop and frisk is totally against the Constitution, and it's totally demoralizing, and it's totally racist because it only happens in African American communities. But Donald Trump came out and said he was going to support that, so I understand her fear of that.
Hello.
Yes, are you there, LaNee? Can you hear us? Okay, sounds like LaNee's having some connection problems. John and Montoya, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Loud and clear.
Okay. She just dropped. I saw that she dropped. But anyway, what I was saying was, so what this person on Facebook, H.O. Wynn, what she was saying was, the stop and frisk thing is the one I want to concentrate on because that's something I'm very knowledgeable about. I'm currently listening to the new Jim Crow. I'm not finished just because it's so hard to listen to. In terms of it's just egregious in terms of how the policy and politicians have ravaged the African American community literally since the emancipation of enslaved Africans, using the criminal justice system to go on and enslave African Americans in a different way, using a loophole in the Constitution to do so, or in the 13th Amendment to do so, and it's very hurtful. And I want to get you guys' thoughts on that. So that's one example of how she shared with me how she's afraid of how the Trump administration is going to negatively impact African American people. So from your perspective, I want to know, do you think that fear is valid? From my guest perspective, do you think the fear is valid that African Americans have been expressing about a Trump, presidency? And that's just being one example. So who would like? You guys can just jump in. Someone, Montoya, you want to jump in first? How about that?
Yeah, sure. So I've been on record in another forum saying before the election, being asked to be at a forum that I wasn't afraid of a Donald Trump presidency. And again, voting third party and not for Hillary or him, but I did come on record saying that. I'm actually like the fact that, for example, that he's, even if it's not the right people, as LaNee has alluded to, the fact that he's stepping out and saying, here's an agenda that I would like to have to affect the African-American community economically. Of course, the fear is, will he do any of it? But I don't let fear drive me, because one thing in that instance, there's something that he's done that no other politician has done, which is speak directly to us. Even Barack Obama didn't do it in this manner. So in that sense, I give credit. But unfortunately, and we've been on the show before talking about this very issue, I need to circle back to it, which is mass incarceration and the over-policing of communities. You've heard me say, and many times, Scott, no matter where you go in the world, if you want to ensure that one group is kept at a lower status, the simplest way to do it is to over-police them. So I'm saying this to say, while I give credit on one hand, I know that the devastation that we experience systematically in our community is driven mostly by what we just talked about, the new Jim Crow and the over-policing of our communities. So it's very difficult to hear, whereas I will speak positively in a way that most African Americans won't about the fact that he's speaking to our community. I know that it can all be wiped out if he absolutely ramps up stop and frisk. I'll give one example and be quiet. I may be wrong about the year, but when New York was doing it at the highest level, may have been 2009, 11, maybe as late as 14, I forget, when their highest point. But an example of the stop and frisk policy, they stopped more African-American men that are actually in the city of New York City. They used to have to report what the stop and frisk for. What the worst egregious example I ever saw of it, and this is on record, according to the New York City data, they had 32,000 stops in whichever year it was. I don't know exactly which year it was. They had 32,000 stops that were for suspicious bulge of African Americans. They found one gun when they stopped for a suspicious bulge. Now, I'm not saying they didn't find guns for stops for other reasons, but when they had to record, when they recorded themselves, when NYPD recorded themselves as saying we stopped for suspicious bulge, one gun the entire year, 32,000 stops. I'm not making it up. I'll pull the records up if I have to for anybody that doesn't believe me on this podcast.
Oh no, those are absolutely. I don't know if this is the exact number, but I know that the numbers are very they're bad, just like that. I mean, there's so many stop and frisk numbers that have proven that it just doesn't work. It's horrible, man. And I'm on record saying a lot that, if they stopped and frisked on my college campus, there would have been a lot of college kids locked up. But they don't come to college campuses. And I went to a predominantly European American school. Even my high school, where it was known that a lot of the European American students were doing drugs, it just didn't get the same attention. And I think that's just unfair. And it's not, I'm not saying this as someone who thinks that if anyone's new to this podcast, I'm not saying it in a way that is hateful or, in any way. It's just a matter of, of fairness. And unfortunately, again, if you watch the documentary on Netflix called 13th, or if you read the book, The New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander, who's a civil rights attorney, she documents all this stuff. And it's hurtful. It's very hurtful to know these statistics. And then if you're listening to this podcast, I'm pretty sure that you grew up in a neighborhood. If you're European American and you're middle class or upper, I'm pretty sure that you know about people doing drugs in your neighborhood. And I'm pretty sure that you know that the police weren't just stopping people randomly or raiding homes randomly trying to find those drugs, even though those drugs were there. But that's what's going on in inner city, and it has been going on in inner city impoverished communities because that's low-hanging fruit, and they know they won't get the same amount of pushback from society in general because they're picking on African American and other ethnic minorities. It's just the sad reality of our country, and it has to stop. So with that being said, again, the question was, do you guys think, John and LaNee, do you think the fear is valid from those African American people who have expressed fear and concern about what a Trump presidency will do to African American people in terms of their health and their well-being, and just being afraid of what, I'll just say it, and when I say, white supremacy is a term that I've learned is it has different meaning to different people. So I'll just say white hate is what white supremacy is the term, but let's just say the extremist white supremacist undertones that have kind of, come up, and they're kind of, walking around loud and proud, and I have some data I'll give on that in a minute. But do you think that those fears are valid? So I guess LaNee, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much. I'm gonna start with agreeing with Montoya. I think in the day-to-day life, I don't have any fear in the day-to-day life. I'm still gonna wake up every morning. I'm still gonna be a mom. I still have to drive my car. I'm still gonna see my family. None of that stuff changes. I don't think any of those things change. I don't have any fear with regards to that. I think you hit the nail on the head. The fears that I do have are relative to the loose mouth, the blatant disrespect, the upfront racism, the disregard for human life. That does strike fear in me as a mother of a black son. I am fearful for what these next 4 years means to him. As a young man walking the streets, if stop and frisk does come back, if he's riding down the street and somebody's driving in a truck beside him who looks at him and has no respect for him or his life and, shoots him or runs him off the street or whatever the case might be, I am fearful of that. And it's unfortunate that this is a real reality. This is definitely happening. I actually just put up a post on my Facebook page the other day about this young man, this black man that was helping this woman. She fell coming out of a store, and she wasn't breathing, and he's literally there administering CPR to her until the ambulance arrives, and her husband says, and I won't use the word that he used, but leave my wife alone. And he's like, I have to help her or she's going to die. He was like, you get the F up away from her. I don't want you to touch her. He's like, sir, if I don't keep doing what I'm doing, she's going to die. The man turns around, goes inside, gets the clerk, brings the clerks out and says, get this off my wife. And the clerk's like, sir, I think we need to let him finish doing what he's doing, and had to literally restrain the man. The ambulance gets there and says the only reason this woman is alive is because this man administered CPR until they got there. The man didn't thank him, didn't say anything, spit at him, and I might be exaggerating on the spit at him, but that's basically how he felt, and kept moving. This is a grown man. He's in tears with he was like, I've never been treated that way before. I've never been called those names before. And he was like, is this where our country is going? That does scare me. Not anything else about the presidency. Not the economy, not, jobs, none of that. Just the blatant level of disrespect and how people are going to be treating people. That does strike a nerve with me.
Wow. That's great context, especially and great context and perspective, especially as the mother of an African American son, where there's plenty of instances where young African American men have been shot and killed. One of the most egregious is just because he was playing his music. The story of the kid was playing his music too loud, and a European American man was offended and he took his life. I don't know if argument ensued and et cetera, or whatever happened, but the fact that it even became an issue is one of the things that I know. It's just one example of the stories that I hear about, why people are fearful. I want to just give this one report before I share a couple things before I bring you back in, John. There's a organization called the Southern Poverty Law Center that tracks all the hate-based groups in America and also tracks incidents of hate crimes or hate, in any form, whether it be physical, verbal, et cetera. And they have a story about the post-election, a summary of the data post-election. There were 867 post-election hate incidents, and they even do it by date. And one of the things that happened is that since November 8th, 2016, schools have been the number one place where hate incidents have occurred nationwide. And there's been close to 250 hate incidents in schools based on anti-immigrant hate since the election. And then they have like a chart of what it calls here anti-black. There were over 150, and then there's anti-LGBTQ, et cetera, as well as anti-Muslim, anti-women hate, and they have a tally of them all. And one of the things that stuck out to me that I wanted to share with you, let's see here. A mother in Colorado shared this story. These are self-reported. People report these to this organization, and I'm going to share the link in the show notes, and it shows how they get their information at this website. But one mother said that her 12-year-old daughter, who's African-American, a boy approached her and said, now that Trump is president, I'm going to shoot you and all the blacks I can find. There was another instance where a woman said, in Louisiana, I was standing at a red light waiting across the street, and a black truck with 3 white men pulled up to the red light, and one of them yelled, F your life. F your black life. The other two began to laugh, and one began to chant Trump as they drove away. And, I mean, there's so many. There was one where just one more I want to share with you. An 18-year-old service employee in Kalamazoo, Michigan, asked a man if he needed help, and he replied, I don't need to ask you for SHIT. Donald Trump is president. He then called her a black BITCH and spat on her shoes. And it goes on and on. And then the craziest one that I just have to share is this. It says that white people have been threatened for bringing black friends past the boundaries of quote-unquote white neighborhoods. A man in Nantucket, Massachusetts received 3 letters warning that his community had zero tolerance for black people. And it says, we have reclaimed our country back by selecting Trump, one note read, and you are now messing up everything. The final letter warned, "We have just cleared the White House of niggers. Do not bring niggers in our neighborhood. We will kill them." And that comes from the same website, the splccenter.org, which is a very prominent website in terms of providing these data and statistics. And it's a very balanced site because they also report on African American. Just so our listeners know, they also report about extremist African American groups as well. So I wanted to provide some of that in terms of some of the fear that's out there. And I want to get your feedback on that, John, in terms of what are your thoughts in terms of how this segment of European Americans in our country, which I know is not all European Americans, and it is a segment of European Americans, and I'll even venture to say it's a minority of extreme European Americans that are out here doing these things. And I've heard personal anecdotes as well, people having some experiences like this. So I want to know, John, what's your thoughts on this about in terms of the fact that Donald Trump being elected has sparked a lot of this type of behavior?
Well, I truly appreciate you clarifying because literally I don't consider them to be humans. When people act like that way, it's not human. It goes beyond white and black. That's just ignorance at a level I can't describe. So first and foremost, no, I don't condone it, and there's no way anybody should be accepting of that behavior. The story that LaNee shared and the instances that you just shared, they're disgusting. They're despicable. There's not a word strong enough for it. However, I am going to say that we cannot honestly believe that all is just now coming out because Donald Trump has become president, because that kind of ignorance, those kind of hate crimes, that kind of garbage has existed. It existed this past year prior to the election, and it's existed for as long as I can remember. Now, the fact that it's been brought into the spotlight, I don't think that's so much because Donald Trump is the president. It's because we now have an extremely mobile social media. It's no different than a guy who used to cheat on his wife in the 70s or the 80s or the 90s now has to be completely, way more careful going out today because anybody that knows him or knows his wife could take a picture of him, post it on the internet, and he's outed. So the ignorance, the hatefulness, the racial whatever, whether it's a verbal crime or worse, is all now in the mainstream, and it's basically out there for the public to see and witness. That's why I personally believe it has become common. It's always existed. I think all of us would agree that, the racism and the hate crimes have been there. They've just been covered up. It's no different than Babe Ruth being a horrible alcoholic, but back then the media covered that up, so we didn't learn about all of his negatives until probably 20, 30 years after he was dead. That's the nature of where we are today. I am not sitting here saying that I condone any of it. I don't. I don't think that Donald Trump's presidency is creating more of it. I think we are in a situation right now where Trump has absolutely opened up a can of worms. I am glad that we are going to have change because I didn't want another 4 years of what we experienced under either one of the Bush administrations, the Clinton, or the Obama administrations. If we're all being honest, our country has gone to crap the past 25, 26, 27 years. And it's because the political machine, not Obama, not Bush, not Clinton, the entire political machine, along with the very controlled media, has basically held us exactly where we were. Now, that being said, is there going to be a lot of issue to deal with during the change? Absolutely. But again, I'm going to go back to my comment in the beginning. If the African-American community, and I'm not in any way saying I understand or can possibly feel what you feel, but I am going to say that as a white guy, a white male, a European American, I have had my own share of issue being treated poorly and being fearful in the African American community. But I don't label that on all African Americans, and I don't label that on any segment of society. I just know there's some ignorant people out there that's how they are. We have to come together as a human race, as a United States community, and that's really what it's going to come down to. We're going to look at that glass, and we're going to see whether it's half empty or half full, and I'm going to challenge everybody to say, let's tip the damn thing over and refill it with what we want instead of arguing whether it's half full or half empty. Donald Trump is not the enemy. We have to recognize that the enemy is within us, and we have to come together as the very vocal, loud majority that wants peace and harmony instead of allowing the very small, ignorant, violent minority to control all of the information and to speak out against the media, which I think every one of us on this call will admit censors and gives us what we want or what they want us, not what we deserve to hear in every instance. And there's just enough examples out there of censored news media clips and sound bites that were designed to create and incite, and I'll use the word incite, racial disharmony and aggressive behavior, not to bring us together, but to keep us divided and angry.
Okay. So thank you for all of your perspectives on that. And I want to give mine, and then you guys can jump back in. So, again, going back to the topic, should African Americans be afraid of a Trump presidency? And, you know, as I've learned in all of the research and all the study I do and just being a part of the world and, you know, interacting with different people in different places and different times, and I've gone on record, as Montoya said earlier that he did, I went on record saying that, you know, initially after the election, that I'm not afraid. I don't do fear in that way either. And I will say this, though. After I shared several thoughts about I'm not afraid and, you know, my thoughts about politics and things like that and how I think is all designed to keep us at odds and a lot of things that John just said. I had a few people come onto my comments and share how they are afraid. And what that caused me to do is pause a little bit because, you know, I don't want to minimize their feelings. I don't want to be insensitive to their feelings. So before I say what I'm going to say, I want to say that I understand that, you know, we're all different and we all come at this thing called life from different perspectives based on our collective life experience. So for individuals who are African American, because of what that means in this country, I empathize with you and I sympathize for your fear. And I don't want to minimize your fear. I'm only speaking for myself, okay? But I do understand why you're afraid. And I can understand that if you are that person that is getting disrespected and called names, even if it's from someone who is, as John calls, not even human, because I personally think that you have to have a mental illness to be, and that might even be fair based on how I view mental illness nowadays, but I'll say that there is something severely socially inept with a person who is prejudiced based on prejudice just based on someone's ethnicity. I think less of those people. So their opinions don't bother me. Someone can come and call me a nigger to my face, and I'll think it's their problem, not mine. So with that being said, but I had to work on myself to get to that point. So I respect where you are if hearing those things bothers you and if you're fearful of what can happen. I respect all of that. I do. Now, in terms of Scott, in terms of how I feel, I'm not afraid of a Donald Trump presidency because, again, I understand that everything is just a matter of perspective. So, for example, John just said that our country has gone to 30-whatever years. From my perspective, our country's always been crap. And the reason why is because of the way that African Americans have been treated, you know, throughout the history of this country. This country was built on treating African American people like crap. So, from John's perspective, it just started happening in the last 30, 40 years. I respect that. That's his life. But from Scott's perspective, in terms of the collective African American experience, it's always been crap. And now I could say even now from my personal perspective, just in how I move and shake in my life, another reason why I'm not fearful is because I have privilege. I'm educated. I know how to speak and navigate systems. I know how to, you know, I'm incubated to a sense because my parents were educated, and therefore they provided me with a certain lifestyle and a certain level, again, a certain cognitive abilities and certain social outlets, and gave me a certain level of social capital to the point where, granted, on any given day, there can be some, racist police officer who decides that they want to, target me. But the chances of that happening in the first 37 years of my life, it hasn't happened. And I'm going to say that there's a great chance that it won't happen for the next 37. Because primarily the people that get targeted are poor people, poor African-American people. So where I could say that I'm not fearful or that, quote, unquote, things have gotten better in American society in terms of race, do you think that the poor African-American young man who's being railroaded for having a small amount of weed on him and now getting a felony and now can't go out and get a job, and how that whole mass incarceration story unfolds, do you think that things have gotten better from that person's perspective? Absolutely not. So I want to just kind of add those layers of complexity and context and nuance to say that where I'm not fearful because of my privilege. I'm not fearful because of all the things I just lined up. But that doesn't mean that the poor African-American who doesn't have the social capital, doesn't have the education and some of the resources to jail today, I have money and people who will bail me out that other people may not have. So it's certain things I understand why, as an African-American, I'm not like all African-Americans. This whole concept that all African-Americans are in the same boat is false. It's just false. There are African-Americans who have the same amount. Let me just say this. We all know that there's social stratification, okay? And there's levels to social, based on where you are, where you fall on the socioeconomic ladder, there are certain privileges afforded you is what I'm trying to say. And there's African-Americans who've climbed that ladder to a certain point where they don't have to be fearful in the way that others who haven't climbed it are. Does that make sense what I'm saying, guys? You still with me?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to make sure that you guys can still hear me. Okay, so with all that being said, that's why I'm not fearful. But let me just say this. What I am concerned about and what I will say is that the whole political system in the media is a farce. Crimes that are happening, the hate crimes, when I say hate crimes, some of them are more egregious than others in terms of like churches being burnt, swastikas being drawn on buildings or people being called names. As John said, those things have always happened. Unfortunately, they've always happened, and those people have always been among us. But the news media gives us what they want to give us. Just like they only give us African-American, crime at higher levels, or they only give us, European-American versus African-American, police murders, but they don't give us the murders of European-Americans who are out here murdering cops, or vice versa. They don't give us the murders of European-Americans, murdering each other, the rapes and things. They don't have a brand. They have this brand called black on black crime, but they don't have a brand for other ethnicities criminalized, ways or, criminal behavior, et cetera. So basically I say this is what John said. The media gives us what they know that we want. And it's all based on the political themes and the political climate. And it plays on our fears. It plays on our differences. And it divides us. It further divides us. And I'm tired of it. And one of the things that, again, my way of protesting all of that is by not voting. Because I feel like by me voting, I am supporting that system that is designed intentionally to divide us. The whole concept of liberals and conservatives and, everything is a label. It's labels to divide us. I reject all of that. I reject all of it. So in terms of me being fearful that Trump is president, absolutely not, for several reasons. And do I think that African Americans should be fearful that Trump is president? I'll say this. I think that African Americans, especially poor and working class African Americans who tend to be targeted for all of these racist policies and systemic racism hurts them the worst, they should be fearful not of a Trump presidency. I think that they should be fearful for the same reasons they should have been fearful for their entire lives. That's because systemic racism is alive and well, and it always has been. And it bothers me that all of a sudden, because Trump is president, that is getting all this attention, where I feel like we should be addressing systemic racism in education all the time. We should be addressing systemic racism in our economy and poverty all the time, in our health system and criminal justice system all the time. We should be addressing systemic racism in all those things all the time. And also we should be addressing poverty in this country all the time because poverty is criminal. And the same way that African Americans get hurt by poverty, so does European Americans and other Latinos and Native Americans and Asian Americans. They all get hurt by poverty. If you're poor in this country, you're targeted. And it just so happens that if you're poor and you're a minority, especially African American, you get hurt more, okay? So with that being said, for me, I live that struggle daily. I live that burden daily against poverty and systemic racism. So Trump getting elected to me means nothing. It means nothing at all, because all the problems in our country that existed pre-Trump, they're going to exist during Trump, they're going to exist after Trump. And it bothers me that we only get riled up in the space of this political climate instead of being riled up about these things all the time. And here's what I'll say. I know that there are people, many people, who are riled up about these things all the time. But unfortunately, we've been sold this bag of goods that politicians are going to fix it. And politicians have never fixed it. So my question to my listeners and my guests is not even a question, but I guess a rallying cry, or just me using this platform to get a message out, is when are we going to come together as people to fix our issues one community at a time and stop thinking that it's all about politicians, because it's not. Politicians, it's a career choice. It has nothing to do with making things right in society. It has nothing to do with the analogy John gave that I love about dumping the cup and starting over. We literally have to do something that's never been done before. It's not about looking to the past for solutions. It's about looking to the past for context. But ultimately, we have to create something that's never been created before. We have to create new realities. And those new realities have nothing to do with black, white, African, European, Asian, Hispanic, Native, Indigenous. It has nothing to do with those labels. Conservative, liberal, has nothing to do with that. Southern, Northern, you give me Democrat, Republican, has nothing to do with that. It has to do with our livelihood. It has to do with our wellness. And ultimately, as all people, I don't care what you label yourself. I reject them all. I'm just Scott. I don't care what you label yourself. We all want safety, and we all want to be able to pursue happiness. And we want freedom and independence to pursue happiness the way we see fit. We all want that, right? We all want wellness. We all want a baseline of wellness. And I'm excluding the extremists in this conversation because I believe they are on the outskirts. The majority of Americans, we all want the same things, but we let these differences divide us. So for me, when we had that conversation, I get very frustrated. I'm going to say this, and I'm going to let you guys jump back in. I've gotten very frustrated over the last month watching all this fear-based rhetoric, all this fear-based concern coming across my timeline. Because my thing is, if you're so afraid, when are you going to do something different? You thought Hillary was going to do something different? You thought all of a sudden all those problems with poverty and, again, economic, social, political, all those various things, health, criminal justice was going to change just because she got elected? So it's my perspective, it's my opinion, and it's my challenge to people to start thinking beyond politics. I may be wrong, and I'm okay with being wrong. This is my perspective. I don't put it out there to be right. But I am passionate about it. I do a lot of research that backs up a lot of things that I say, and these are the conclusions that I draw. And I just wanted to put that out there, and I'll let you guys jump back in if anyone has anything to say before we close out in terms of, my perspective. No one?
I'm still here. I wanted to go ahead and allow both LaNee and Montoya to speak, but I'll say this. I love your passion, Scott, and that's why I am here.
Yes. I'm sorry. Okay, I was on mute. Sorry, by accident. I was trying to be quiet. But, Scott, if I could, I would actually like to challenge Race Haven because from this standpoint, because I think I understand, what you're trying to do here. Me and John have talked personally one-on-one about his efforts for, in a sense, why he continues to do this, which I've told him I'm appreciative of. There's an opportunity, in my opinion, right now to bridge a gap that has not been crossed even in this discussion. I personally feel like this discussion is still kind of been discussed in narratives that kind of are put out there for us as intellectual as we say we want to be. I think we're still speaking in narratives. And here's an example of what I'm talking about. And it's an example of being able to move past the narratives. So I have a personal anecdote from those examples you gave from the stats. I'll give you a real life example of something that I've experienced. So before the election, me and my best friend got into it. He's a Hillary supporter, and then of course I'm absolutely against it because she's been very detrimental to our community, and I think her track record's obvious. You know, we got speculation with Trump. We have an obvious track record with her. So that's kind of where I stood. So me and him got a big heated argument over why I'm telling him I'm not afraid of Trump, you know, for all these good reasons. And so as we're going back and forth, and I'm kind of breaking it down point for point on, you know, her policies versus we're scared of rhetoric with Trump, eventually he starts conceding in that area. But what he ends up saying to me, as an educator, he's in the school system. He says, okay. He says to me that, okay, policy-wise, maybe I don't have these things to go by, so, okay, you got me there. He says, but education-wise, what we are experiencing in the schools has been episodes of bullying that seem to be ramping up. Bullying is always around, you know what I mean? And, of course, John, I know you said we don't want to attribute it to Trump, okay? But he said these things are ramping up, and so I'm sitting there going, well, I'm still not going to be afraid of that. Bullying is a policy, kind of like what you said, John. But here's the thing. We've never had a candidate's name become a racial epithet. So to say he's just being a politician, he's a racial epithet now. So that's something in addition. But here's the thing that I want to say where I had to change my mind in the argument between me and my best friend. So after he gets elected, I was doing a summer after school, not a summer, but a holiday camp here in Georgia. And literally, I watched these three little kids build these Legos. And they were just literally, and I wrote about this or whatever. But anyway, they built these Legos, and all it was just a rectangle. But it was long. And I was like, wow, I've never seen kids with their imagination build just simply a rectangle and nothing else. It's like, this looks kind of boring. But the three of them were really putting their time into it. I was like, well, why would they even do that? Then I see them come together, and they stack and these kids are 5th grade at best. They stacked the three rectangles on top of each other and literally started chanting, if you want to build a wall for Trump, clap your hands. And I was like, this is what my best friend was talking about. So okay. I say all that to kind of say, only thing I say all that to kind of say that in having this conversation, honestly, every situation that you laid out in those stats, we can't always just simply dismiss that as, well, here's the equivalency of what I face too, when these are real life experiences where LaNee says, as a mother, I am afraid for these reasons. If you're going to ramp up over policing, this is a real life thing. But if we go, well, those people are just terrible, and this has always been around, we never bridge the gap you want to bridge, Scott, because we just had it in a narrative that just dismissed it all.
So what I'm saying is, Montoya, I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to highlight what I'm saying, because that's a great story, and that's what's going on, on the ground level. And it's all. And my point is, like what you just said, those things are going on, and there's been things that have been heightened since Donald Trump has been elected. But the point that I've been making on social media is that those things if we don't do something drastically different, we're going to continue to be having these type of stories about those type of issues over and over and over again. Because even if you have 8 years of President Obama, who you didn't see those things as much, and Obama was and all that he did. You know what those 8 years did? Even for people who identify and agree with Obama's politics, his social, platform, and his togetherness and hope and all that stuff, there was still a large segment of Americans who felt alienated, who felt like he was a traitor, who felt like he was all these things, like John said. Whether you, I, or anyone else agrees with it, a large segment of Americans believe that Obama was hurtful to them. So the same way that a large segment of Americans believe that Donald Trump is hurtful to their well-being, 8 years ago, there was a large segment of Americans who felt the same way. almost half. Like, you want to say the half that voted for Trump this time. Let's put it there. So for argument's sake, let's just put it there. So for the 59 or so million that voted for Trump, they were fearful, generally speaking, for their well-being because of the politics and the agenda of Barack Obama. So what people tend to do is they think that their way of living, their way of being is, and what they feel is safe for them is what everyone should feel and be happy with. And then when their agenda gets the platform and their agenda wins, they feel good. But what's happening is, on the other side, those people are hurt, and now you have 8 years of them bubbling up their anger, their dissent, or whatever, and they're going to have a time to fight back, and that's the next election. So when President Obama came up, it was out. The numbers were great in terms of the turnout, especially in the minority communities, because he provided a window of hope. Well, this time around, Donald Trump did that for his segment, and the numbers of the poor and the working class European Americans were up, in terms of their turnout, because he provided hope. And my thing is, we're going to have this seesaw every 8 years in the current system, instead of us coming together as people to create a situation where we all can feel hopeful. Instead of my side wins, so F you for 8 years, F you for the next 4 to 8 years, because my side won. I don't care about what you need. I don't care about what you want. My side won. And this is what I see now going on from Trump supporters and Trump voters. They're like, F you liberals, ha, ha, ha. All this pointing fingers, all this immature, childish behavior is like, my team won, our way of life wins. And now for 8 years, we get the people who are against that way of life, I'm tired of that cycle. You get what I'm saying? I'm tired of that cycle. So what I'm saying is, and what I'm promoting, and I could be a lone wolf on this, and I know I'm not, but I could be a lone wolf on this. I say it doesn't work. I say we need to create a platform around unity and togetherness and compromise of people coming together and rejecting that system. Rejecting that system of divisiveness, my side wins, yours loses, instead coming together, coming up with win-wins, compromising the same way you would do in a marriage when you and your wife, because you love her, and you have to share a case, in the best case scenario, generalizing here, you have to share a household. So you give a little on both sides. You give a little of yourself. You give a little of your wants to make the unit work. And I feel like as Americans, that's what needs to happen as well. I may have to give a little bit of myself, but I'm willing to do that because I'm more invested into the overall community and the overall nation being healthy and us moving forward together. And I feel like we need to figure out a way to do that on a grand scale. And people may call it idealist, pie in the sky. I'm okay with that. That's going to always be my platform. I'm going to continue to speak towards that. And while not belittling those fears that people have about what's happening in the here and now, my point is, if we don't do something drastically different, nothing's going to change and those fears are going to remain. Because, again, there's a segment of people who've always had those fears from previous generations up until this one. For those who've come and gone up until this generation, there's going to be fears within the current system and the current way we do things. So, John, go ahead. I know you want to jump in. LaNee, please jump in and share any thoughts in terms of the perspective I shared.
Go ahead, LaNee. Please feel free to speak first.
Thank you so much, John. So I'm going to say that I think all three of you guys made some really valid points that I agree with and support. I'll start with John when he was talking about the media and he was talking about how much access people have, and I'm going to agree with him on that because the social media does allow people to step up and have way more access to a platform to give their opinion. You have more people using their cell phones to show actions of the police, actions of what's happening. So a lot of things that people would like to turn their face or turn their head on or turn their back on and say, oh, that doesn't happen anymore, it does still happen. It has not stopped happening. It's been happening all along. We just didn't have social media. We didn't have cell phones to show these things. Does that make it okay? It does not make it okay because it's happening. To your point, Scott, which is what I think you just said, was these things are going to continue happening if things don't happen, if we don't make changes, if people don't come together, of which I agree as well. I think that the fear, where I think this whole Trump presidency thing becomes an issue if you want to call it that, it really is in the divisiveness. And you know, and as I say this, I don't even know if this is a Trump issue. When you start pulling out these numbers of 59 million people think this way and 59 million people think this way, we see that we have a nation that is divided. We see that we have people that are still feeling that the old way was the right way. And I'm even going to contradict myself a little bit, because if you talk to some people who voted for Trump, who say they voted for Trump just because they didn't want to vote for Hillary. And then you have people that say, well, if you voted for Trump, you're racist. I don't believe that every single person that voted for Trump is a racist. So when you start talking about that 59 million against this 59 million, I think that we as a nation were in a situation where we had to vote for the lesser of two evils, or you really, really, really wanted some change and you just were not voting for Hillary, so you felt like you had to vote for Trump to do something different. So I think we're at a place right here. I mean, we can really do some great things as the nation is separated. I think especially in our community, the African American community, this is a great time for us to come together, to support each other, to unite, to make the changes that we say that we're going to make. This is a great time for leaders to step up and rise and be the leaders in our community. I don't think that we have to, nor should we turn to the government to be our savior. I don't think that we have to, nor should we turn to other communities to have to like us or beg them to support us or to have our back. I really look at this next 4 years and this time right here as an opportunity for my community to come together and to do some of the unifying and to do some of the healing and to do some of the reaching across locally and nationally for us within community. Does that mean we're pro-black and against, white folks or European Americans? I don't think that that's what that means. It means this is a time for us to stand up on our own 2 feet and do the things that we need to do in our community so that we don't have to be fearful. We want to have leaders. We need to raise those leaders up. We want people to step up and speak for us or talk to us or sit in those meetings with Trump. We need to identify who those people are. We need to figure out what our agenda is. We can't keep mashing our agenda with the masses agenda. And I'm not saying massa, I'm saying the masses agenda, and then say none of our needs are being met. What are our needs? What do we want? Where do we want to go? If we get those things figured out, I think we as a black community, as African Americans, can move forward. That doesn't take Trump to do. That doesn't take Obama to do. That doesn't take any of these quote-unquote presidents and leaders of the free world. That starts with us at this level with dialogue and conversation. So, again, I agree with so much with what all of you gentlemen said, but with the work that I do, it always comes back to community to me.
Awesome. I appreciate that perspective and that context, LaNee. John, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I'm so grateful, LaNee. I appreciate everything that you just said, and I'm grateful to be following you to piggyback and validate some of that. First and foremost, I appreciate your perspective because I did vote for Trump, and I told everybody, since then when they asked, it's because I could not on any clear conscience vote for Hillary because I wanted to change, and I was willing to take whatever fallout came from that change versus what she was very clear with her agenda we would have another 8 years of. So I share that only to say that no, every person who voted for Trump is not racist because I am not racist. The second part that I want to validate of what you said is it really does come down to us. The fact that so many people are still looking out to someone else to fix everything is the problem. And I'm going to go so far as to say that I've been, I don't know, Scott, it's been probably, every bit of 15 or 20 shows that we've done. I'm going to just assume that everybody does understand I'm here for the same reason Scott is, and because I want a better world going forward tomorrow. As a father, I want my son to grow up in a better world and environment than I grew up in. And I think, to Scott's point, every one of us deep down wants the same thing. And there's a very fringe, outspoken, angry, violent minority on both sides of the spectrum that's making all the noise and is controlling what we're describing as fear right now. And so back to what LaNee said, I'm going to go one step further, that it's not just the African American community and the European American community, if we can figure out a way to all say we're going to take our own personal responsibility to dump the cup over and then to work together to refill that cup with what we all want, that's when we're going to experience what we're all talking about. It is a great time for change. I think that's really what Trump represented for me more than anything else. And to Montoya's point, no one was happier than me when I saw all of the GOP leaders as they got picked off one by one in the debates and disappear from the race. And then they all collectively stood against Trump. I want to say it was one of the leaders of the RNC, point blank say on video, on record, I'd rather Hillary win than Trump. That's all I needed to hear to know for a fact what I believed my whole life, which is it was always an us versus them. They kept us separated and segregated as male, female, white, black, Democrat, Republican, conservative, liberal. They literally kept us separated in so many ways so that no one ever looked and said, why do 500 privileged people make the decisions and control 300 million and control us with laws that they're not even bound by? That is the greatest hypocrisy that we've never addressed as a people, as a human race. And so I look at Trump and say, is he the answer? No. But who do you need to kick down a door or a wall to break through? And I'm going to go on record saying, of all the Republican candidates, I actually fell in love with Dr. Ben Carson. But the only flaw I saw in him was he was just too polite. He was never going to be forceful or angry enough to overwhelm what needed to be overwhelmed. And that was the corporate, the media, and the political machines, all three of them at once. And they took their best shots at Trump, and believe me, he made an idiot of himself. I'm not defending or apologizing for stuff that he said because it was, again, out there, but he kicked in the wall, knocked it down, and now we collectively can go out there and say, what do we want it to look like? Because for the first time, it's really not a Republican or a Democratic leadership. It's a let's go create something new. So I'm going to shut up and as I close, say I thank you both, LaNee and Montoya, for your perspectives, doing my best to become more aware. As I say all the time, I don't claim to even remotely understand a lot of the things that you guys have been feeling your entire lives, but I'm doing my best to see things from your perspective, to understand and become more aware, because like Scott, my only hope is to make a really positive change going forward from today. So I thank you for being here, and I thank you, Scott, for allowing me to participate.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks, John. Thanks for that perspective and that context. And I'm going to close out by giving you guys a chance to tell our listeners how to connect with you. And I just want to say this really quick, selfishly, to piggyback a little bit on what John said in terms of Donald Trump not being a traditional politician, not being a Republican or Democrat, et cetera, the fact that he's in, me personally, because of what my ultimate goal is, which is my ultimate goal is that people will stop believing, like John said, letting 500 politicians control 300 million people. My hope is that they'll see that what's about to happen in the next 4 I don't want Donald Trump to be a failure to the point where people get hurt more than they're already getting hurt by the systems that are already hurting people. But I would like for, the next 4 to 8 years to pretty much unfold the way they've unfolded the previous, presidencies, so that people can then see that, it is the whole system that doesn't work. If Donald Trump can't get in there and shake things up and drain the swamp as people want him to do and totally flip the establishment on his head, if he has to fall in line, if he has to do things the way that everyone's always done them, if he can't move the needle, then what do we believe in then? What can this position of power really do anything for us? So I'm hoping that over the next 4 to 8 years, Americans will get so fed up that they'll come over to the philosophy that I've been espousing about, us coming together in our communities and unifying and taking control of our lives ourselves. And when I say come together as a community, for me, our communities are all different. There's people who live in diverse communities. There's people that live in, communities that are homogenous, where there's, predominant ethnicities, and there's people who live in diverse communities. I don't care what community you're in. You come together within that community, and then you network and you collaborate with surrounding communities, and we build a healthy, society as people, as ourselves, and stop letting those 500 control us and control our lifestyle. So that's just my wish. So I hope that that will unfold, but we'll see. So that's our time for today. I want to thank my co-host, John Costino, and our special guest, LaNee Javet Montoya Smith. LaNee, could you briefly tell our listeners how they can connect with you and your work? And we have 10 minutes, so I got to get through this in the next 5 so I can close out after that. So if you guys can briefly take about 1 or 2 minutes to tell our listeners that.
I'll be very, very brief. 2 ways that you can get a hold of me. I only have 2 handles. You can find me on any social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. My handle is at I am LaNee Javet, which is LaNeeJavet. Or you can find me under my business handle, which is Culsire, CULSIRE at Culsire. So either at I am LaNee Javet or at Lord forgive me, at I am LaNee Javet or at Culsire. Those are my 2 handles. And let me say thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
I want you to tell our listeners about the Black Business catalog that you're promoting for this holiday season.
Oh, thank you so much. Yes, we do have the Black Business Holiday Catalog, which is our initiative to support Black-owned businesses during the holiday season, and it will be going on throughout the whole year. So if you are looking to support Black-owned businesses and keep that revenue and that income and those dollars circulating in our community, please go to www.blackbusinesscatalog.com. Again, that's blackbusinesscatalog.com.
Awesome. I'm glad you're doing that, and I wish you and those small businesses much, much success. Montoya, could you please share with our listeners how they can connect with you and your work, and if you want to promote anything? All right.
He must be trying to get off mute.
Montoya, yeah, maybe on mute. Okay.
Oh, okay, I'm on mute. I'm sorry. I'm on mute. I'm actually on mute. Okay, I am on mute. Sorry about that. I just want to say to you, Scott, real quick, I do hope we have much success over the next 4 years. There's a good friend of mine, Shelley Winter, who was actually an African American, who was a Trump voter. I thought it was appropriate for this segment to say this. He just said for him, it wasn't as much as a vote for Trump as it was a vote for the revolution. I think John just spoke to that. So I just wanted to get that out because I thought it was good for this segment. For myself, it's just simply at Mental Dialogue for Facebook. And for Twitter and Instagram, it's at mental_dialogue to get in contact with me. And dialogue is spelled all the way out, not the digital version. So DIALOGUE. As you already mentioned at the beginning of the show, I have a show every Saturday morning on Blog Talk Radio, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And it's blogtalk.com/mentaldialogue2. And if you're in the Atlanta area, every third Friday, we do the Mental Dialogue Live experience. And Scott, look forward to seeing you as you are one of my soapbox candidates tomorrow night. See what you got, brother. Thank you for having me on today.
Oh, no doubt, man. Looking forward to being there tomorrow night. And also I want to share with the listeners that you can also find Mental Dialogue on Stitcher. I know a lot of listeners have listened to podcasts on Stitcher Radio. So if you search for Mental Dialogue on Stitcher Radio, you will find Montoya's show. He's been doing this show for several years. So definitely check him out and his content. And John, if you could share with our listeners how they can connect with you and your work and anything you'd like to promote, please do so now.
Well, thank you so much, Scott. Yes, you can reach me very simply. My email address is my name, John, John, last name Costino, Costino, John Costino at yahoo.com. I can be found on Facebook. There's multiple John Costino Facebook profiles, but if you click on the one, it's the president and founder of MoneyWise. The reason I bring that up is I truly believe, as Scott has already mentioned, there are 2 things that are inherent for everybody, and I'm 100% focused on them. I do a weekly webinar on personal growth, and that entire segment is designed, and it's for free, to help people to start looking at things from a healthier perspective, where we're looking inside for the answers instead of outside, and we're looking for ways to always be coming from a place of love rather than a place of fear. Because if we can do that as a society, we can eliminate so many of the problems. And the second thing that I'm committed to is my company, MoneyWise. We have a real simple philosophy. We're helping individuals, one family at a time, get out of debt. And that's the whole purpose of why we're doing these things. If we can get people to come from a place of love instead of fear and take away the financial stress and burden, we can all live a happier life together. So I look forward to the next chance to be on here. And again, Scott, as always, I thank you for having me. And Montoya and LaNee, it really was a pleasure being here with you.
Thank you, John. And John, where can people find your webinars?
If you're friends with me on Facebook, we post it every Wednesday. We do it Wednesday nights, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard. It's a 1-hour webinar, and everyone is welcome. We don't talk business or anything, but you friend me on Facebook, and I will have that link up there every Wednesday.
And that's John Costino with a C, Costino, John Costino. Find him on Facebook to take advantage of those webinars. I've been a member of John's leadership calls in the past when I was a business associate of his, and his personal growth and development trainings are amazing. He brings amazing context, so I definitely highly recommend those. So again, I appreciate all of you for listening today. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the Race Haven podcast on the iPhone podcast app or Stitcher Radio app for Android so that you never miss the dialogue. And if you love this show, please leave us a review on the podcast and Stitcher apps. This will help the show gain more visibility and listeners. Also, we want to hear from you. Email us your perspectives at solutions@racehavenpodcast.com, and we will read a few of them on a future show. Please visit the Race Haven Podcast Facebook page or visit racehavenpodcast.com and leave comments and questions about today's show. You can also join our online community by joining the Race Haven Community Dialogue Facebook group. If today's show resonated with you, please share the links on social media, text them to your friends, share them on social media with your friends. Help us spread the message of dialogue. Help us spread the message of sharing diverse perspectives and welcoming diverse perspectives and learning from each other and coming together and understanding that we have to reject fear. We have to reject fear and operate in a place of love and togetherness, as John stated, as LaNee stated, as Montoya stated, coming together and revolutionize against, the divisiveness and the fear-based rhetoric that is the current environment, and coming together in love. So with that said, a Race Haven is a safe place for people from diverse ethnic, religious, cultural, and political backgrounds to bring their race-based perspectives, questions, assumptions, frustrations, and experiences to engage in thoughtful, honest dialogue in an effort to transcend race and unify America. Remember, we are all smarter when we think together. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Race Haven Radio Show and Podcast. Be sure to visit www.racehavenblog.com to comment and learn more.
Xfinity Mobile is a new kind of network designed to save you money while streaming your favorite music, like that 90s Jams playlist you've played 72 times today. It combines America's largest, most reliable 4G LTE with the most Wi-Fi hotspots. Get up to 5 lines of unlimited nationwide talk and text included with your Xfinity Internet at no extra cost. All you pay for is data. Visit an Xfinity store or click now to see how much you can save with Xfinity Mobile. Restrictions apply. Requires Xfinity Internet service. Equipment, taxes, fees, and other charges extra. Limited to 2 lines pending Internet activation.